In 2006, the Alabama football program was a distressed asset. It was generating roughly $60 million in revenue, but the brand was stagnant and the product was underperforming. Fast forward to 2024, and that same entity is a commercial juggernaut valued as high as $1.74 billion. Most observers look at Nick Saban and see a football coach, but if you analyze the balance sheet, that title is woefully inadequate. Saban was actually one of the most effective CEOs in modern American history. He didn't just win games, he built a scalable, high-margin corporation that subsidized an entire university system. Today, we are going to audit the Saban business model using the financial statements and valuation metrics usually reserved for Wall Street. Let's start by quantifying the Saban premium. When you strip away the emotion of sports and look strictly at the P&L, the growth trajectory is staggering. In fiscal year 2008, Saban's first full financial cycle, football-specific revenue sat at roughly $64 million. By fiscal year 2024, that number had exploded to over $140 million. That is a greater than 100% increase in top-line revenue, a growth rate that significantly outpaces the average S&P 500 company over the same time frame. But revenue is just cash flow. The real story is enterprise value. Before Saban arrived, the program's valuation was estimated below $500 million. Today, valuations based on data from the Wall Street Journal and The Athletic place Alabama football's worth between $846 million and $1.74 billion. That represents a 3x to 4x multiplier on equity value, created almost entirely by one executive's strategic leadership. However, the direct football revenue is actually the smallest part of the financial ecosystem. The massive hidden value lies in what economists call the Flutie effect, but Saban took this concept to an entirely new level. During his tenure, University of Alabama enrollment surged by 60%, jumping from around 25,000 students to over 40,000. This wasn't just volume, it was margin. A massive portion of that growth came from out-of-state students paying premium tuition rates. Saban's on-field product acted as a global marketing funnel that drove billions in incremental tuition revenue that the athletic department never even touched. Then you have to look at the media rights leverage. The SEC recently signed a massive $3 billion deal with ESPN. Why did the network pay that premium? Because they needed reliable, high-value inventory. Saban provided consistent, high-rating dominance that gave the conference unprecedented leverage at the negotiating table. That dominance directly inflated the per-school payout to over $70 million annually. It was the anchor tenet of the deal. Finally, look at the donor economy. In the business of higher education, winning is the most effective fundraising strategy available. Football-specific contributions doubled from about $21 million to over $42 million annually. When the stock price, the team's ranking is high, the investors, the donors, open their checkbooks. But here is where it gets interesting. Revenue is just the output. To understand how he generated these returns, you have to look at his operational expenses and organizational design. Most people misunderstand Saban's famous process. They view it as a motivational slogan or a psychological trick to keep players focused. But from a business perspective, the process was actually a rigid corporate operating system designed to eliminate variables and maximize efficiency. It was essentially Six Sigma applied to college football. Saban didn't run a team, he ran a logistics and supply chain organization where the inventory happened to be 18-year-old athletes. The first pillar of this operating system was what we can call the staffing arms race. Saban identified a critical market inefficiency in the NCAA rulebook. While there was a strict limit on the number of on-field coaches allowed to instruct players, there was absolutely no cap on analysts or consultants. Recognizing this regulatory loophole, Saban built the modern support staff model. He hired armies of analysts, often former NFL coaches or experienced coordinators, to break down film, analyze opponent tendencies, and optimize game plans. He created an R&D department that rivaled professional NFL front offices. This created a massive competitive moat. While other programs were spending money on flashy uniforms, Saban was pouring payroll into human capital, creating an information advantage that smaller programs simply couldn't afford to replicate. Within this staffing model, Saban executed a brilliant talent acquisition strategy known as the Coach Rehabilitation Program. He treated coaching talent like distressed assets. He would identify high-level coaches who had failed in head coaching roles, people like Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, or Mike Locksley, and hire them as offensive coordinators or analysts. Because these coaches were often still collecting massive buyout checks from their previous employers, Saban could sign them at below market rates. He was essentially getting premium executive talent for pennies on the dollar, leveraging the dead money on other universities' balance sheets to subsidize his own payroll. This arbitrage allowed Alabama to have a coaching room with more collective experience than most NFL staffs. The result of this organizational design was a product output that is statistically absurd. The program produced 123 NFL draft picks during his tenure. Those players went on to earn a cumulative $2.26 billion in professional contracts. In business terms, this created a powerful recruiting feedback loop that drastically lowered his customer acquisition costs (CAC) for future talent. When you can point to $2.26 billion in alumni earnings, you don't have to spend as much energy selling the value prop of your program to a five-star recruit. The ROI is visible on Sunday television. Critically, Saban managed this empire through a strictly siloed management structure. Every employee had a specific narrow job description with strict key performance indicators (KPIs). Do your job wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a management directive to stay within your operational lane. This ensured that the organization ran mechanically regardless of turnover. Unlike the hero ball management style of other coaches who rely on their own charisma or a specific coordinator's genius, Saban built a system that survived losing key coordinators every single year. The machine was designed to be agnostic to the components, allowing for seamless replacement of parts without a dip in productivity. With a massive revenue stream secured and a stable operating system in place, Saban mastered the final piece of the CEO puzzle: aggressive capital allocation. He understood that in a nonprofit university setting, retaining earnings is pointless. The goal is to reinvest every dollar of profit back into the enterprise to widen the competitive advantage. This is visible in the $288 million deployed into facility upgrades during his tenure. Most observers view locker rooms with waterfalls and sports science centers as frivolous spending. Saban viewed them as CapEx investments with a calculated return on invested capital, ROIC. In the sales cycle of recruiting, facilities are conversion assets. When you have the best facilities in the country, you reduce the friction required to sign top talent. These buildings were not just for player comfort, they were closing tools designed to secure the labor force required to maintain the product's quality. This feeds into the recruiting flywheel. By heavily investing in facilities and the aforementioned support staff, Saban secured the #1 recruiting class nearly every single year for a decade. If you break down the math, the ROI is staggering. The program spent roughly $2 to $3 million annually on recruiting expenses, flights, hotels, logistics, and meals. In exchange, that spend secured the talent necessary to generate over $140 million in annual revenue. A $3 million spend to protect a $140 million revenue stream represents an ROI of nearly 4,500%. There is perhaps no other expenditure in the entire university budget that generates a more efficient return. However, the true test of a CEO is how they handle market disruption. The introduction of name, image, and likeness (NIL) laws was a regulatory shock that fundamentally changed the business model of college sports. For 15 years, Saban operated in a centralized, control-based model. NIL decentralized power, shifting leverage to the players. While many of his peers complained or retired, Saban executed a late-stage pivot. He shifted from a model of total control to one of influence, working with third-party collectives to ensure Alabama remained market competitive. He understood that the labor market had shifted from unpaid internships to free agency, and he adapted his recruiting pitch to emphasize the long-term value of the Alabama brand over short-term cash grabs, maintaining market dominance even as the rules of the game were rewritten. Finally, we must assess his impact on the broader economy. Saban was effectively the most important economic development officer in the state of Alabama. Economists estimate that football game days generate between $200 and $235 million annually for the local Tuscaloosa economy. Hotels, restaurants, and local businesses built their entire fiscal years around the 7 Saturdays. Saban's team played at home. When you view his compensation through this lens, the numbers look different. Critics often cited his $130 million in total compensation over 17 years as excessive. But when you weigh that cost against the greater than $1 billion in enterprise value created, the tuition revenue spikes, and the billions in local economic impact, Nick Saban was arguably underpaid. He delivered a value-to-cost ratio that would make any private equity firm envious. Nick Saban's legacy isn't just the 6 national titles at Alabama, but the blueprint he created for running a sports franchise as a solvent, scalable business. In the modern era of college sports, the head coach role is dead. It has been replaced by the general manager, and Saban was the first to realize it. So if you want more breakdowns on the business behind the scoreboard, subscribe to Revenue Racers for the next deep dive.